Okay, I put the list in order of reading into the chat. Oh, and I sent it just to Rachel. Let me send it to everyone.
It'll be good.
Okay, does everybody have that now?
Yes.
Yes, yes, we do. Thank you.
Okay, I have a spreadsheet with your bios on it, and I'm needing to manipulate the spreadsheet and look at you all. So,
Well, very shortly we will be muting everybody, and we will be commencing the show.
Should we mute ourselves?
No, I'll do it. I'm just waiting for Cassandra to pass the host thing over to me.
Okay.
So I can do that, because I can't do that unless I'm the host.
Actually, I think we can mute everybody,
Wait,
Mark.
there we go. Sorry, to mute everybody, what do I press?
Let me do it. There.
I see. So you can be a co-host and do that too, yeah?
Yes, you can.
Well, welcome everybody on this, well, very sad day, celebrating Dean Kostos' fantastic work. As you all know, he passed away very suddenly, and I think he had a lot more that he wanted to do. But at least today we honor him and honor his poetry and writings, and hope that his name will live on. As some of you know, I published 2 of his books. Of course, I'd be happy to publish more, as and when it might be possible to do so. I think Dean was a supremely talented writer. He had the ear, and he had the language, which, excuse me, normally don't always come in hand, but in Dean's case they did. And I think also, given a few more books, a few more years, he probably would have been better known than he considered himself to be. As we all know, sometimes these things take time. But cream always rises to the top, or oil. And I'm delighted to have you all here today to celebrate Dean's life. I'm going to read one of his poems from Broken Color. It's a rather unusual poem. It's called The Man Who Wore His House as a Belt. He imagined relics in the attic, photos with serrated edges, a mute flute, vinyl discs hissing. No, a crow swooped in black embrace, less silkily than recalled. The man claimed his childhood house betrayed him, called him a liar. He needed to find what he never knew, imagined a family who celebrated together. Photographs would prove that. Voices sang from a diamond needle, hovered like a moon slashed by clouds. The man who wore the clapboard house as a belt lived between 2 worlds. His upper self taught him Hopkins, Vermeer, Poussin. His lower self, resistance, a kick when trapped, legs dangled like roots, body halved by the inability to escape and the need to do so. So that was one of Dean's poems, The Man Who Wore His House as a Belt, from Broken Color. And now I'm going to hand the feature for this week to Larissa, who has put together this amazing selection of people who knew and loved Dean. And I'm looking forward to hearing all of you. Larissa.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your participation. Thank you for listening. If you're here to listen, we are grateful that you're here, and we thank you for being here to honor dear Dean. We used to say to one another, bok choy, and that was our code for we're going to visit this weekend. We're going to get together and we're going to watch films about angels and videos about the Holy Spirit. And Dean believed in reincarnation. So if you find yourself writing an extremely good poem, you might be channeling our friend. Let me read you his bio. Dean Kostos' collections include Broken Color, Pierced by Night-Colored Threads, This Is Not a Skyscraper, recipient of the 2013 Benjamin Saltman Poetry Award, selected by Mark Doty, Rivering, Last Supper of the Senses, The Sentence That Ends with a Comma, and Celestial Rust. He co-edited Mama's Boy, Gay Men Write About Their Mothers, and edited Pomegranate Seeds, an anthology of Greek American poetry. Its debut reading was held at the United Nations. His poems, personal essays, and translations have appeared in over 300 journals, such as Asaricus, the Bangalore Review in India, Barrow Street, Bayou Magazine, Bitter Oleander, Blanket Poems Project, released with visual art and exhibited at Columbia University, Bloom Boulevard, the Center for Book Arts, Chelsea, Cimarron Review, Confrontation, the Cincinnati Review, the Dos Passos Review, Journal of Feminist Studies in Religion, Mediterranean Poet in Sweden, New Madrid, Plume, Kartsaluni, Southwest Review, Stand Magazine in the UK, Storyscape Journal, Two Bridges Review, Vanitas, Western Humanities Review, and on Oprah Winfrey's website, oxygen.com. His libretto dialogue, Angel of Peace, Angel of War, was set to music by James Bassey and performed by Voices of Ascension. Kostos literary criticism appeared on the Harvard University Press website and Talisman. A multiple Pushcart Prize nominee and a finalist for the Jival and Jotspeak UK Awards. He taught at Wesleyan, the Gallatin School of New York University, and the City University of New York. His poem, Subway Silk, was translated into a film and screened in Tribeca and at San Francisco's Indie Fest. Recipient of the Rockefeller Foundation's Cultural Innovation Grant, he compiled, edited, and translated poems from ancient Byzantine and modern Greek. He presented his paper, Schemes and Schemata, Endless Play, and read his poems at the Mahindra Humanities Center of Harvard University. So let us start our reading. First up, we have Elaine Equi, who is the author of many books, including Ripple Effect, New and Selected Poems, and most recently, The Intangibles from Coffee House Press. Please go ahead, Elaine.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Larissa. Thank you for organizing this, and thank you, Mark, for publishing Dean's work. And I do hope there will be future books. I met Dean in a writing workshop that I taught at the 63rd Street Y in New York called The Writer's Voice. And Dean was a core member and a key member of a group that just was so many amazing writers. And the workshop kept taking it over and over again. So I think, I'm not sure, but I want to say maybe a couple of years at least, I felt like Dean was a presence. And several of the poems in this book, The Sentence That Ends with a Comma, came out of that period. They're familiar to me. And I would like to read the blurb that I wrote for that book and then two poems from it. So the blurb is, fluid is a good way to describe Dean Kostos's style. calligraphy of swim on thirsty paper, moving with ease between the classical and the contemporary, the seductive and the straightforward. Whether eavesdropping on mannequins in a bridal shop or wandering through a museum of scent, the reader will be glad to follow his line's lush variety all the way to the last comma. And I remember very clearly one particular week I had given a prompt to write a poem beginning with a line from someone else. And Dean, as an example, read for our group poem beginning with a line of Pindar, the Robert Duncan poem. And Dean read it so beautifully, and he just appreciated that poem so much that he was able to give all of us a sense that that expansive quality that Robert Duncan has was something we could all tap into. And I think that that's very much part of the spirit of the sentence that ends with a comma, kind of that feeling that there'll always be more words. It's not going to be a period, which is a wonderful thing for a writer to feel. But I'm not going to read the sentence that ends with a comma. I'm going to read the poem that Dean wrote for that prompt, which was a poem beginning with a line by Robert Duncan. Salmon swirl, trout stream, gold carp in the shadow pool, whirl of ink sacrificed to water, brush pushed down, lines lush variety won by pressure, calligraphy of swim on thirsty paper, strokes gesture a seeing through, for I, we, you're here too, stand below the surface of thin choreography and look Chinesely up to salmon, trout, carp, their liquid bodies light outlined like hands joining and separating, the sun, their always distance, and ours. So beautiful, so beautiful. And then I really want to read this other poem. Yes, Museum of Scent. And the reason I want to read it is because I love perfume, and I have several poems that I've written that are kind of short little poems of imaginary perfumes. And then when I was looking through Dean's book for what I was going to read, and I came upon this poem again, I realized I stole that idea from Dean. So thank you, Dean, for such a wonderful idea. Museum of Scent. This is a series of very short little poems where Dean took a lot of writers and artists and made an imaginary fragrance for them, boiled them down to their signature scent.
Mm.
It starts with a prologue.
Mhm.
Museum of Scent, prologue. As I step toward the first decanter, I invoke memory, the muse's mother. Remember, Pandora's box was really a jar. Joseph Cornell. Pandora's reliquary becomes a scentless stage. Butterflies insert sinister wings like quotation marks around everything overheard. Joyce Mansour. This myrrh burns for forgetting, coiling from a canopic jar. Hieroglyphs depict selves torn from her by the jackal-headed god of exiles. She collaged her Egyptian to her English to her French self, watching light filter between the ragged edges. Judy Garland. A depression glass moon spotlit by song loomed above a soundstage. The disc shattered into sharp glitter, filling this red shoe, odors of sweat, gin, and makeup that neutralizes shadows. Vincent van Gogh. In an old turpentine bottle, those last daubs of crow float, flecking a sky the sky could never hold up. It crushed him. His pulverized bones mix with the stink of absinthe and turpentine. Paul Celan. His mother's dress stained with perspiration, vaporized inside this urn before she could say that the words read were the words between the words written. Jane Mansfield. The atomizer is fringed with false eyelashes, like stitches on a scar, scent of mascara and formaldehyde. Inside, a brain twitches. I was what I wasn't allowed to be. Coco Chanel. I uncork the flagon's gold and pearl stopper, surprised to hear the perfume of a night train's sulfur and the blind moans of lovers. Sylvia Plath. Inside a terrarium, the house and yard where she planted her thoughts beneath the yew tree, plaiting her hair with poisonous resins, playing its strands like a lyre. From the kitchen window, aroma of baking words, burnt on the bottom. Just two more. James Merrill. Like fish-scented mist, a voice in the vial swirls from a planchette saying, get closer, he won't mind. He'll spell your name scattered with sea salt. Konstantin Cavafy. Cylindrical amphora, sealed with foreskin, now peeled back. History sighs with cigarette breath. It ended before I could say yes. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dean.
Thank you very much, Elaine. Jerome Sala's latest book is How Much? New and Selected Poems, just out now from NYQ Press. Jerome?
Hi. What I want to talk about a little bit, because it relates to the poem I'm going to read, is something Larissa alluded to as Dean's mystic side. For many years, off and on, I've always searched out types of meditation. I guess I become obsessed with it. I guess because I don't, use any drugs or anything, so I have a substitute. And it has had me run into some eccentric characters. And this one teacher I used to meditate with was this guy from India who used to channel these other meditation teachers, very eccentric, and he wore long robes. And what would happen is he'd put some ash in the middle of your forehead, and you'd sit there and put your eyes up here, sit for an hour. And then afterwards, he and his wife and other people would sing these bhajans and mantras in a very extremely loud, cacophonous fashion. So he came through town. He wondered if I could, organize a program for him many years ago. And I did. And it was at the ARE Center. They gave us a room. And Dean was a member of the ARE Center. So this program goes on. It's really loud and cacophonous at the end. And I feel a little sheepish about, doing this whole thing. But then I see Dean and I go, oh, somebody from the poetry scene. And Dean came up to me and he brushed all my embarrassment away and said, I was incredibly moved by this. So it really made me feel better. And I thought, well, here's somebody who could bracket all the eccentricity and see to the heart of the matter. So years later, at the beginning of the pandemic, he wrote me a note saying, hey, I know you from the poetry scene. I know Elaine. And I know you from this meditation thing that I was at. He said, could you do this blurb for Broken Color? And I said, sure. And at the time I was reading some Jungian stuff where they talk about the symbolic realm, the realm of symbols, which is between everyday life and the absolute. And I start reading this book by Dean and I go, God, he's like a Gnostic who's playing with this symbolic realm or the imaginal realm or whatever they call it. So I wrote this blurb for him. And then I'll read the poem that goes with the blurb. So the blurb for this book was, Jungian psychology advises that when traveling through difficult territory, one should look to a symbol for guidance. The poems in Broken Color heed this wisdom. Kostos taps into the alchemy of the symbolic realm that mediates between mind and body, reflection and experience, identity and its permutations. The result is a contemporary Gnostic poetics in which, quotes, flesh becomes intellect, joints bend into grammar, and angels emboss human veins. If you're in need of transcendence, start here. The last line is a sales line because I figured at the beginning of the pandemic, everybody was needing transcendence. I sent this to Dean, wondering whether this would be too eccentric for him. And again, he said, this is perfect. This is exactly what I was trying to do in the book. So to pay off the Gnostic side of Dean in the most literal way, I'll just read this short poem in the book called Gnosis. The psyche knows itself in the corridors of green mirrors, steps into cool waters, meets itself in half-lit hallways, imprints pollen paths. The self dips to drink, its face melting, reformed, mind's jagged extremities. The soul knows itself by itself, feet plashing. So thank you, Dean, for all that inspiration.
Thank you so much, Jerome. Patricia Spears Jones is a poet and author of The Beloved Community, Copper Canyon 2023, and A Lucent Fire, New and Selected Poems, White Pine Press. And she shared the LaGuardia Community College basement offices with Dean Kostos until 2017. Patricia?
I thought they would unmute me, but I have to unmute myself. Dean would appreciate that. I am still in shock, of course, that Dean is not here. I just, when I saw that on Facebook, I just was amazed. And then I thought, well, this is the second sort of really good person, good man that I can think of who's died in the last couple of years. I guess last year was Gary Linhart. Dean was really incredibly prolific, disciplined, creative, but then he had to get a day job. In fact, he had several day jobs. I mean, I think he was teaching at about 2 or 3 different places, which was really awful. I think he deserved like one place to be so that he could do the things he needed to do and be safe. And he didn't get that. And like a lot of people in New York who are creative and wonderful and really do amazing things, he had to work in a system that doesn't pay people very well, barely gives them benefits, and puts them in the basement. Alice Lacey is also reading on this, and she too was shared offices with Dean. So we know that system, even with all of that, and I couldn't find actually the book that I blurbed, which I think Trace Peterson was mentioning earlier before we came online, which I thought was an extraordinary book, and that he was sort of, that he was in, that particular book was like in Neruda territory, that he was that his mind, his heart, his ideology was that large and complicated and sophisticated. And so hoping that more and more people find his work. He really, he also taught me, and I think a lot of other people, how to use social media. When he went on Facebook and started raising money to finish his memoir. And it was and I knew it took a lot, because for a man who was that busy, that hardworking, who was, organizing reading series at Cornelia Street Cafe, so all these things, he was also intensely private. And so I thought that was a very bold move for him to do. And he had obviously an incredibly difficult sort of family life. But he talked a lot about his grandmother. And we went out to dinner a couple of times. So I didn't get to have the bok choy moments like Larissa, which is kind of great. And I was thinking about the poem that Mark read, and some of the same kinds of images show up in this book from Rivering, this poem from Rivering. There's a whole series of poems about photographs. And this one, it just, it says something about a man who understood what mercy was or is. Myself to myself, a retrieved photograph at age 7. And this is in Rivering, that came out in 2012. You offer me a cloudy cat, barely contained in your arms. Left hand curled like a catalpa leaf around furred shoulders, right hand bracing the rump. Your pale sweater's collar is a double V stripes, red and blue. Despite descending grays, the V's are victories that swallow your neck. Your lips pressed together in a perpetual beam, stuttering the word boy. Your eyes blend into mine the way twilight swims with the diluted sun as night prepares its questions. Your eyes plead, is this enough? I offer you what I've loved most, my friend in his white cloak of fur. No, no future caress will reveal the adults behind. Mother in wool suit and window pane jacket. Father in pleated slacks, cinched by the brown belt, sometimes used on you. Its buckle a squinting eye. Who ripped the rest of the photo away? The jagged halo around you. When your eyes engage mine in the commerce of cat, I make the bones in my arms malleable, bend them into the slender black and white past, accept your unanswerable gift. Dean's character, Dean's poetry, Dean's kindness, Dean's generosity were all gifts to us. And I'm glad that he's being honored tonight. Thank you, Larissa, for doing this.
Thank you, Patricia. Is Tina Mercedes on the line?
Yes, I am, Larissa. I'm sorry, my name shows up as York Grill. I apologize, I forgot about that.
This is Dean's cousin, by the way.
I want to thank Larissa so very much for organizing this beautiful event, and I'm very touched by your effort. And I also want to thank Patrick, because what happened was Dean had contacted me. We weren't very close when we were young because he lived far away and we're actually cousins-in-law. But as adults, we became close, and I'm so grateful for that. And Patrick called me, a few weeks ago, and he said, I haven't heard from Dean. I said, it's weird that you should say that, because I spoke to him and I emailed him a couple of times and I haven't heard back. And I thought, well, maybe he's just busy. And that's how this all started, that we found out what happened to Dean. So I'm very grateful to Larissa and Patrick. As you all know, he was such a brilliant, brilliant writer, and I'm so proud of the work that he accomplished. And the man oozed sensitivity and grace. He just oozed it. And he was so kind and funny, and we would always enjoy each other's time together. And, his writing, his kindness, his sensitivity, he made the world a better place. And that's his great legacy. And I'm just so pleased that he could be in my life.
Thank you so very much, Tina.
Thank you,
All right.
Larissa.
Thank you very much, Tina. And next up, we have Rachel Hadas. Rachel Hadas's most recent book is Pandemic Almanac 2022. A new collection, Ghost Guest, is forthcoming in the spring of 2023. Rachel?
Sorry about that. Thank you, Larissa, for putting this together. It's wonderful to see all these friends of Dean's. I don't know if I'm alone in not quite remembering when I met Dean. I want to say at Gay Men's Health Crisis in the 1980s, but it may have been later. But he had a permanent place in my life and in my imagination. And it seems to me that his poetry, always rich, continued to become more refined over the years, but maybe that's just the effect of coming back to it. Let me read, because there's a lot of poetry this afternoon. I'll just read the blurb I wrote for Rivering, the 2012 volume Patricia just read that wonderful poem from, and then I will read a brief poem from Rivering. I'm working on an elegy for Dean. I am sure I'm not alone in doing that, but it's not ready. To his own medium, poetry, Dean Kostos applies his art teacher's advice. Draw in the mystery, press down harder, let darkness draw all the elements together. An impassioned observer who sees beneath the surface to subterranean rivers, Kostos is attentive to the confluence of dark forces. Yet his richly rendered poems also offer burnished and evocative depictions of our world as encapsulated in art. Both in its themes and in the controlled lushness of its style, Rivering presents a feast of figuration. And it seems to me that that style, always lush, became more controlled over the years. It's a pleasure, a poignant, sad pleasure, but a pleasure to revisit these poems. And someone, I think Dean's cousin, talked about how he enriched life. There can't be too much beauty. And that's what one of my lessons from looking at Dean's work is, and looking at his life. This is a little poem in Rivering called Have the Dead Washed One Hand? Sparrows rinse their wings in pools of dust. Do the dead begin like good children, meaning to wash their hands? Is it slower for some, the ones who chafe on satin shures? Do the dead, in their battle with soil, lave from flesh and memory all that once clung, all that said, I have? Some dead wash invisible wings in muddy thaws of March before their flesh flakes, gold leaf from an icon. Some dead bathe only one hand before entering the Cathedral of Bones. Thank you, Dean.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Alfred Korn's most recent books include a new translation of Rilke's Duino Elegies and a collected poems volume titled The Returns. Alfred?
Thank you, Larissa. It's nice to see everybody. You know, Dean had a sort of compartmentalized social life, so I didn't meet his other friends. I mean, some of you I know from other contexts. So it's a pleasure finally to see you. Like Rachel, I don't remember exactly when I met Dean. It was sometime in the early 90s, but we pretty quickly got to be friends. I liked him, I liked his poetry. And I remember visiting his apartment once, and there was a little shrine in it. I think his Greek Orthodox religion was important to him. And I think his identity as a Greek American was important to him. And of course, like most of us, he admired poets like Kavafi, Ritsos, Seferis. And he was proud to be a gay person. As you know, if you've read his memoir, his early life, home life was very unfortunate. And that's what resulted in his being taken to the institution in New Jersey, where his treatment was ghastly. And if you have not read the memoir, I certainly recommend it. It's a very powerful piece and an indictment of the treatment of mental illness in this country. But I still do think of him primarily as a poet. his love of world mythologies puts him some rather in tune with Jung's writings. His identity as a gay man who'd been persecuted, I think, inspired a sympathy in him for the English mathematician Alan Turing, who, as you know, committed suicide by eating a poisoned apple. And those thoughts led me to choose this poem, which is an epistolary poem that he imagined between Carl Jung and Alan Turing. And it's called Imagined Postcards Between Alan Turing and Carl Jung. And there's a little note that says, by many accounts, a postcard correspondence occurred. 1. Dear Dr. Jung, I see myself as a philosopher of the unknown, shadowy personae webbing my face. Despite what some think of mathematicians, we're not averse to intuition. Gödel's incompleteness theory, to understand origins, spurred my belief in co-creation. Ciphers spun into chess games, paintings, poems, thought. The death of someone I loved magicked an electronic brain into life. Its cerebellum accommodates infinite mind. Nothing is lost, not unlike your oceanic unconscious, source of endless undulations and depths. Respectfully, Alan Turing. Dear Dr. Turing, our disciplines aren't dissimilar. I find inspiration in numerology, in alchemical serpents, suns, and moons. Processions of archetypes invade me. I'd like to make their faces vanish, but study them instead. Can your electronic brain interpret their allure? Didn't you pose the daring question? Do automatic calculating machines think? Forgive my presumption, but I've read your work. I'm not the only one who regards your ideas with zeal. Dr. Freud described a beaked beast who pecked retinas to feed nestlings and an automaton with bleeding human eyes. With appreciation, Carl. Dear Carl, the persona, as you explain it, is compelling but elusive. The Latin reveals itself, a mask. I can't unveil a personal nature. In recurring dreams, I wear a disguise of smoke. Despite its immaterial matter, I can't detach it from my face as though it were nailed to my flesh. This contradiction disturbs me, which is why I'm writing to you. I'm familiar with your theory of animus and anima. Stamens are male parts of a flower, carpels female. We fool ourselves thinking we're separate from nature's codes. At best, we opiate our minds. Most heartily, Alan. 4. Dear Alan, in Vedic text, gods and goddesses twin aspects of each other. Like biology, mythology reconciles contradictions. The god Shiva's destructive powers are regenerative. He wears a snake around his neck, its shedding skin a symbol. Death allows rebirth. Increasingly, we need to believe that. Constructing my mythologies and illustrations, I courted psychosis, tormented by visions of eternal winters, blood rains, fiery tornadoes engulfing our planet. Now, this world war. Was I mad or visionary? Maybe a scientist must be both. Respectfully, Carl. Dear Carl, I watched Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Does the queen, masquerading as an old woman, embody your archetype of the trickster? How do you perceive the protagonist? As the maiden who eventually recognizes her power and reclaims the prince? Must we, explorers of the unknown, bite into a poisoned apple to be ushered into death? From its lavish shades of unknowing, my brain work has emerged, like Snow White rising from her glass coffin. Friend, this will be my final postcard. Think of me ascending a lunar sunrise, phosphor pulsing toward infinity. Yours ever, Alan.
Thank you so very much, Alfred. Trace Peterson is the author of Since I Moved In, Chax Press, and co-editor of Troubling the Line, Night Boat Books, and Arrive on Wave Chax. She is currently a visiting assistant professor of English at the University of Connecticut Stores. Grace, go ahead.
Hello. Hi, everybody. It's really wonderful to be here celebrating Dean. And thank you so much, Larissa, for doing that. I met Dean in 2009 when I was teaching at LaGuardia Community College. I was there from 2009 to 2013. That was the beginning of my long 14 years of adjuncting in the basement with everyone there. 14 years of adjuncting, but 5 years of adjuncting in the basement with everyone there. It was a pretty brutal office, like a closet with a hallway. And Dean, I don't know, Dean just sort of, I forget how we originally connected, but he just sort of took me under his wing and he was very welcoming. I was really impressed by that, especially. He didn't feel competitive with me at all. Even when he heard I had been assigned a creative writing course, he was incredibly welcoming and encouraging, and he gave me his syllabi and everything. He was just the most generous person. And I remember wonderful conversations and lunches with him, talking about poetry and talking about Jung, the dungeon. Yes, that sounds correct. The dungeon. Alice just said it's called the dungeon. The office is at LaGuardia. But yeah, so what I remember of Dean is someone who was incredibly serious about poetry and just took poetry very seriously and just very passionate about it, but was very kind at the same time too. And those two things, you don't always see those two things together. Often when you have someone who's very serious about poetry, they can be kind of brusque or cruel to those around them. And Dean was just incredibly generous and welcoming to everyone. I also felt very, let's see, and his work has that combination of things too. I think, you know, the seriousness and the kindness and the openness. He worked a lot with form, or was interested in different kinds of forms like villanelles and pantoums. But he also had this sort of crazy surrealist thing going on, which was just wonderful in his language, using very rich vocabulary of multisyllabic words and very lush, almost James Merrill-esque at times, listing of these lush words. These are some of the things that I loved about his poetry. I'm going to read something from Last Supper of the Senses, because that was the book that he had published when I met him. I'll just say briefly that we lost touch. We had a really great friendship for a couple of years, and we lost touch when I transitioned. I think that I was going through a lot of things, I think, and I would put the impetus, I would put the blame on why we lost touch on myself. I probably should have tried harder, but we were still in touch after that, in an ongoing way. But I feel like there was a great friendship there, and I sort of fell out of touch with him. And I miss that friendship. I wish I had not taken it for granted so much at the time, because he was very nice to me. He's very kind to me, introduced me to a lot of people. And that was unusual, you know, and I think I at the time I was a little bit more focused on people in the gay community who were cruel or not welcoming. And I should have just always go toward the love. I think that's one of the things to remember about poetry. Life is too short and poetry is too much work. at a certain point, just go toward the love. So one of the exercises that Dean gave me all of his syllabi, and one of the, which I still teach quite a bit from what he did, because I thought it was very sound pedagogy. It was open enough for students to generate a lot of great stuff. But at the same time, and be really out there and crazy, but at the same time, he was very precise about his directions and instructions for everything. So this is the a class trip writing exercise, because the creative writing program at LaGuardia involved using New York as a laboratory, as a writer's laboratory. So he said, first walk around, explore the sculpture, the buildings, the fountains, whatever triggers your imagination. Imagine that the object you have chosen could speak to you in first person. What story might it tell you about itself? What does it make you think about? What feelings does it raise within you? While sitting or standing in front of the object you have chosen, free write for about 5 minutes. Write rapidly thoughts or words that pop into your head as you look at this object. You do not need to worry about spelling or grammar or writing complete sentences as you free write. Just free associate on the subject. Try to be as specific about visual details as possible. You may use the bottom or the back of this page to write on if you like. When you are finished free writing, circle 3 lines that you think are the most powerful, mysterious, and important ones. Could they suggest a story with characters? If so, what would they say to each other? What conflict might arise? And I'm going to read a poem that I would propose is probably written using with a technique sort of like this. It goes with those poems of Dean's that are urban landscapes, or they have some kind of urban setting. Often in his poems, people, the setting abruptly changes, like you might end up in a different country somewhere suddenly. But this is a poem that's just in one setting, and I think it's following something like that procedure that he would tend to give his students. So this is from Last Supper of the Senses. This is A Day in Güell Park, a park designed by Antonio Gaudi, Barcelona. A dragon's bronze snout points me to a grooved plateau. Antonio, I'm inside your brain. With each footfall, your thoughts warp around me. I see what you saw from your cranium. An onion dome unfists a cross across which your name is spelled out in soldered rods, frail as roach legs. Step by moist step, hibiscus and geranium, tamarind and tangerine, cherimoya and lime, olive, monkey pod, candleberry, jacaranda. Roots bolster caves, majolica encrusted columns buttress a balcony of palms. Mosaics glint a splintered sun, how your hands healed fragments into helixes, stars. How an artichoke dome unpeels itself, reveals a galaxy of cobalt tesserae. The dragon inhales the enormity, a water goatee dripping from his chin, his paws draping over a basin. Counting warts on his back, I wonder, is he your daemon? Will he lead me where he led you through tourmaline corridors of art? As if to answer, wind gusts a geranium scent. A mustache gate screeches open, ushers me through halls to terraces, where flame-shaked cacti point down to poplar rows. I follow the alley to a ribbed vault that devours other tourists and me, the way the great fish gulped Jonah. Children's shouts echo out to their mothers, hair rippling like Catalan flags. As I yowl La Canto Hondo, my echo swings back, returns me where I began, 1 foot outside your thoughts, waiting by a bald cypress for your espiritu. Entrance become exit.
Wonderful. Thank you, Trace. Sharon Mesmer is a poet, fiction writer, essayist, and teacher, and her most recent poetry collection is Greetings from My Girly Leisure Place. Blue Books 2015 voted Best of 2015 by Entropy Magazine. Sharon, please
Thank you, Larissa, and thank you, Mark, for hosting this great reading. I like a lot of people were saying, I don't remember when Dean and I met. It was probably because I heard him read and I became a fan because he wrote about saints and he wrote about mysticism, and that's something that I'm interested in. And then we actually wrote a collaboration together. I believe it was Sharon Dolan, and she's here and she can correct me on this. I think Sharon Dolan was doing a series at the Center for Book Arts of collaborations, and she put together couples of poets, and she put me together with Dean. And we were really excited about this because we have very similar kind of traits in some of our poems. And so we were discussing like where we should write our collaboration, and he suggested the General Theological Seminary in Chelsea, and I thought this was the most perfect place, you know, because of the subject matter that we liked. And this was August 2014. And so when we got there, we decided that the structure of our poem would be something like the last sound or the idea in a line would become the first sound or the first idea in the subsequent next line. And yeah, we wrote there. It was a really hot afternoon in August. And we were both going through some things that we talked about before we wrote. And it was probably one of the most beautiful afternoons I've ever spent writing poetry in my life. And so we called our poem Avila after Saint Teresa of Avila, who was one of our favorite mystics and saints. And so this is that poem, Avila. I don't remember who started or whose line is whose, which is interesting. The hardness of wood is gentle, lessening, as the shepherd's arm cradles the lamb. Lambent amethyst and ruby melts into my eyes. My zeal for disentangling is nourished. Shedding darkness, a face sprouts from a snake's chaotic forked torch, giving off darkness. Somebody stole from D.H. Lawrence right there. Nestled on stone clouds, a regent is either ether, raining in error, or organza rain, which cleanses, but cannot negate gates that open, close. Zone beset with premonitions. Titian painted the sun with crushed insects. Sectors of sun shadows cast by thoughts ought to make way for Teresa's rose-scented ghost. Still, they conceal the impish angel's arrow. Arrows spread across her smile, leaden arrows turning gold. Old age blooms in a blue halo. Oh, lodestone, to know the fate of our bones owned by the sepulchre's vaporous maw. Awestruck now, we wed the wind with thistles, leaves, and thorns. Ornithographers drowse over history books. Schoolboys snooze across acres of moss. Ossified saints wait for remembrance. Ancient scribes tear at their pages and begin again, gaining what they lost when endings betrayed sustaining regress. Rest finds form in the formlessness of drapery. Reason imparts the sun's sword. Words, brick by brick, build alpha and omega, gold from lead, lapis from a glassy retort. Torsion enlivens a tree of flames, sends messages to the five horizons. Zion flickered in Teresa's rough chakra, Kairos limned by temporal bliss. Is Avila's wall what words cannot contain? Aimless is the way, wayward the aim. Dean Kostos and Sharon Mesmer, written at the General Theological Seminary, Chelsea, New York City, August 11th, 2014. Thanks.
Thank you so very much, Sharon. Lovely. As you know, Dean, besides being a brilliant poet, was a brilliant memoirist, and we're now going to hear a short section from his memoir, The Boy Who Listened to Paintings. Bonnie Walker is going to read it. Bonnie, a friend of Dean's, is an attorney and writer who lives and works in New York City. Bonnie, go ahead.
Thank you, Larissa. Yes, I remember where I met Dean. I first met him through Martin Mitchell, who some of you may remember, an editor, poetry editor. And I met him again. We were both reading at an event in Northern Manhattan. It was a reading of memoirists. And so we bonded over the fact that we were both memoirists. And I reviewed his memoir and gave him comments and was I heard all about the long and arduous process of drafting it, getting it edited, getting it published. And that's why I wanted to read from his memoir. I know he's better known as a poet, but he's also a wonderful prose writer. And to give a little context, this is a very short excerpt. And to give a little bit of context, toward the beginning of the book, Dean's mother has been hospitalized at the Institute of Pennsylvania Hospital, which he refers to throughout the book as the Toot. And right before this excerpt starts, she's come home and she's in recovery mode. And Dean, of course, is very young and dealing with this. If I didn't look out for mommy, no one would have. I was afraid of her going to the Toot again. I'd hear her crying with the voice of a little girl my age. Although it scared me, I knocked on her door to keep her company. She welcomed my visits. Once she called me over to show me something. On the nightstand, she had stacked 24 Milltown bottles at different heights, like an imaginary city. Dean, look, I'm going to Milltown. What's Milltown? Sedatives. They make mommy feel better. I told her I made pretend worlds too, but I didn't tell her I was a doll god, twisting toilet paper into dolls, the way I pictured God made humans. I kept 75 dolls with names on their backs, 4 whole generations, in a box under my bed. Some died of cancer and heart attacks. One committed suicide. Another was stabbed, but most died of old age. I gave those dolls wrinkles and gray hair. I was also the undertaker. When dolls died, I temporarily buried them in the sand below my swings, sticking twig markers so I could dig them up. At night, muskrats patrolled the back lawn. I watched from the veranda. A month later, I went back to the markers and dug up the dolls to see what death looked like. Lacey, eaten away. Then in a bathrobe and construction paper miter, I waved a censer. In made-up New Testament Greek words ending in on and os, angelon, kyrios, dalios, detheon. I chanted prayers over my dead dolls, burying them in the creek's clay banks, their final tomb. This was my private world, as mommy's was hers. Conversation was where our worlds met. I just really love this introduction to the creative Dean who saw the imaginary city, who created these dolls. Some of this material is also the subject matter of a poem that Dean wrote. That's the opening poem of Broken Colors. It's a wonderful poem called The Doll God. And what I get from this excerpt from the memoir is just the empathy that he's able to put us in the world of that child who's confronted with circumstances, as many children are, that he can't control and doesn't understand. And in response, he creates this world of dolls and becomes God to that world. And in his poetry, he treats the same subject matter. And there, he has such a voice of power and authority, as he does in all his poetry, which I think has come across time and time throughout this reading. Mark said that he had both the ear and the language, and he does. He had such a sense for the music of poetry. He wasn't trying to sound like someone else, and he didn't sound like anyone else. He had a definite, distinctive voice that is Dean Kostos. And not every poet has that. When Dean inscribed his memoir to me, he wrote, "To the healing power of art." As Dean's friend, I'm not sure that Dean really got healing out of writing his memoir. He told me that it was very, very difficult to write. And on more than one occasion, he told me, he equated it to being flayed alive. I think it was being flayed alive. He found it so painful. And I remember hearing him read from this book during one of his book launch events, which was at the LBGT Community Center on 13th Street. And at a certain point, he actually started sobbing. And it wasn't the sobbing of someone who was recollecting griefs that he'd worked through. It was so raw and it was so painful. And he was right back there in the moments that he was reading. And as his friend, I wasn't so sure it was so good for my friend Dean to be spending so much time back there. And I say that not because I want to question whether, what is a work of art like this worth the price it extracts from the creator? Because I'm very glad we have this memoir. It's a beautiful book. But I think a price was extracted. And I think the reason it was is that Dean put so much of himself in his writing. And it's not a foregone conclusion that writers do that. There's so much of Dean in everything he wrote. I had been very worried about Dean. The pandemic was really hard on him. He was suffering from a lot of depression and anxiety. And I, as his friend, I wondered what can I do? And I don't think I think I did all the wrong things. I don't think I did any of the right things. One of the things I wish that I had done now is actually read more of his poetry. As I was reading his poetry in preparation for this event, I realized I really hadn't engaged with it in a long time. And to me, it was like getting reacquainted with someone that I really missed, and maybe that I hadn't realized I had missed so much, because everything that's the best in Dean is in his poetry, his wit, his compassion, his sensitivity. So I know we won't be having Chinese food with him. He won't be holding his big birthday celebrations if any of you went to those. We won't be hearing him read his poetry, and I don't know about reincarnation, but I do think that, he lives on in his writing. And to me, that's a solace. So thank you, Larissa, for this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bonnie. Thank you very much. Okay, next up, Karen Neuberg is the author of the full-length poetry collection Pursuit from Kelsey Press and 3 chapbooks, including The Elephants Are Asking, Glasslar Press. Please go ahead, Karen.
Hi, thank you, Larissa. Thank you for putting this together, and everyone who's participating and just being here. This is it's moving in so many ways. I do remember how I met Dean, how we met each other. We met each other at a Molly Peacock workshop at the 92nd Street Y. I think it was the late 1980s. Dean still lived in Brooklyn Heights then, which is where I still live now. And so we rode the train back together. And then I happened to be walking down Montague Street the following day, and Dean was sitting at a restaurant having a hamburger or something, and I joined him, and then we just became great friends. He introduced me to workshops at St. Mark's. He was so enamored with language and taught me so much. I have books that he used to use. I mean, my own copies, but the word menu, the flip dictionary. He would call me up and we would just discuss words. And of course, we did go out for Chinese food and other restaurants in Chelsea once he moved. I'm going to read from Rivering. I'm reading a poem that just called to me after I read like poems from different books that I have of his. For those of us who knew Dean pretty well and also read the memoir, we know that he did have hepatitis C at one point, and he wasn't able to take the standard medication, and he had to seek herbal remedies. So he was very worried about his liver, and he did manage to get cured. I think this poem brings out a lot of what Dean did in terms of spirituality, mysticism, his respect for various spirituality techniques from different religions and backgrounds. And it's called, and colors, it's called Color Chant, after a Navajo chant for healing. Deity of sound and color, enter house of silver underleaf, house of delirious firefly, house of fallen claws. Collect them to unhook stars, your footfall drums of flute breathing above you. Deity of understanding, excuse me, and ember, for you I clutch a book of birch bark. For you my voice blooms vermilion. Restore my liver to live. Restore yes to my eyes. Deity of dirge and pigment, with a carved box of dreams I walk. Toward chanting waters I walk. Bandaged in ochre leaves I walk. From broken bells I flee. From bones ground into bread I flee. From the red deluge I run. May I run past shadow's boundary. Deity of cries and marigold petals, I rise between two rivers. May it be mountain blue before me, slate blue behind me, rain blue above me. May it be sea and wind all around me. In the stinging of color it began, in the ripening of chant it has finished.
Thank you so very much, Karen. How multitudinous our friend Dean was, my God. Anyway, next up we have Isa Anastasia Rivas is a multidisciplinary artist and poet dedicating her work to the hardships, traumas, and political struggles of the Puerto Rican diaspora. Please go ahead, Isa.
Hi, everyone. I met Dean through Lacey, who's also here, who also will be reading. Lacey was my professor at the time, and she always brought in a poet to teach their own work. And Dean brought in his poem, if I remember right, the sentence that ends with a comma. After I heard that poem, I wanted him to be my professor. And I ran to him very next semester. As soon as I saw class open, I jumped in. And it was there where we met. We developed a friendship through our work, through poetry. He introduced me to so much. I have to say how much he helped found a lot of a lot of my aesthetics, the things I really like in my own poetry. And we would spend weekends to a diner talking about the surrealists, talking about art, talking about poetry. And we did that for so long. He was the first person to help support my work, to feature me in both his reading series and help me feature in other reading series at the Cornelia Cafe. I have a lot more to say, but I'm still really grieving, you know, and it's still a big shock to see him. He was a mentor and a friend. I don't think he ever liked me calling him a mentor, but he was certainly all of that. And one of the things I'll say extra that he left me with, something that I've been struggling with as an artist now, trying to take I'm a writer primarily, but I'm slowly going into the visual art scene. One of the things he would always tell me was he became a poet because he was a failed artist. And I took that for a very long time, but I question it now. I fully believe that an artist, I remember a line from Philip Guston saying that the artist is always working on a single piece of art. They just change the medium or change the style in which they do it, but they're all working toward that one thing. And I believe Dean himself was also working toward that one art. He was a painter early on in his life, and he stayed a painter. He was just doing it with words. And that's how I'm going to be remembering him and thinking of him as I proceed forward through my work, through my art. And yes, I am picking a poem from his last book, Broken Colors. I didn't get a chance to read this book when it first came out when he was alive. I regret that. I got it as soon as he passed. As soon as I heard it, I needed to read through this book, and I needed to read through all the other books to remember again. And when I initially flipped through the book, I just flipped through a random poem, and it happened to be this poem, and it's a poem that will now stay with me for the rest of my life. The poem is called "The Finisher Speaks to Sharon." A finisher hand sews linings, pockets, and clasps onto fur coat. No longer alive, my hand is a flame. Embroidered wings arc beyond all, floating. Who I was and am remains an unvoiced question. Haloed in apricot light, I see the former work of my body, suturing satin into fur coats. Needle in hand, I stitched at home to send money to my family in Greece. But you knew me long before, a braided girl, supporting her family with my loom. Married, my husband trundled me to America. You knew me when he forced me to drag weights to abort my babies. You tucked each fetus into your robe. I moaned guilt's litany and wept into a black bordered handkerchief when my husband's heart erupted, cradled in my daughter's arms. There, Pieta. Years passed. She married in a blizzard of veils, a dark column. I planted seeds of light. My last day, I meandered your name. Sharon, take me. I couldn't peel my eyes from you, invisible to all but me. When death rattled, you gathered me in your arms. I smelled your incense breath when I slipped from form. Into an ocean of arpeggios, I nestled into the leaf of soul. How membrane thin the wall between flesh and lumina. Those in form don't know how close we are. We swim the dialogue between realms. I, embroiderer, gnosis, thread and fiber. From the brocade whirling on your sleeve, you, Sharon, offer me your hand. Thank you so much.
How apt. Thank you very much, Isa. Professor, playwright, performance poet, Kimi Ramirez respectfully contributes to this celebration of the life and work of their dear colleague, Dean Kostos. Kimi, please.
Thank you so much for organizing, and thanks to you all. It's so beautiful to hear Dean's words through all of you. I met Dean 9.5 years ago when we put together at LaGuardia an exhibition called the Peep Show, which stood provocatively for Professors of English Exhibiting Paintings. So it was a small collection of us in the English department who, are primarily known as writers, but we also, paint or do other visual artwork on this side. And it sounds like some of you are lucky enough to also have experienced Dean's amazing visual artwork. If you have access to some of his prints or paintings or drawings, it would be great to stay in touch and see if we can't circulate those wonderful pieces as much as his writing is circulating. So I'm going to read a poem called Mary Magdalene, a Tree, and it's after the sculpture by Donatello. So a lot of Dean's poetry has allusions to visual artworks, and it's written so spectacularly with someone who has that eye and that soul, who can see artwork from the inside as an artist. So in this, perhaps he's employing the exercise that Trace alluded to as well, where he's animating a statue and giving the statue of Mary Magdalene voice. He carved me ragged. My wooden gown hangs jagged on my frame. Supposed sins drip from my limbs, tears pierce soil, regrets grow to seedlings, no and not. I can't cleave myself from shame, can't speak my truth's sparse leaves. Tourists gaze at me from guidebooks. Alone, I stand in this sunless corner. Phantoms of recall call mercilessly as night floods the city's stone streets. Rumors spread and distort my past. My words can't smite them. I remain in this Florentine niche, leafless, loveless. And of course, the Donatello statue is in El Duomo, and we had many conversations about Florence and Italy as well. So it brings together a lot of what made Dean Dean for me. Thank you all.
What made Dean Dean, absolutely. Thank you so much, Kimi. Next up, we have Ron Kolm, who is a contributing editor of Sensitive Skin magazine, the author of 5 books of poetry and 2 collections of short fictions, as well as being an editor of 6 Unbearables anthologies with an archive at the NYU Library. His review of Dean Kostos' book of poems, Pierced by Night-Colored Threads, can be found on the Sensitive Skin magazine website. Ron, please.
I was actually going to mention that. I gave it a rave review. It's just the most marvelous book. And I'll read the poem Liberation from Pierced by Night-Colored Threads. And like many of his poems, it's an ekphrastic, which I do understand now because those are poems based on an image, on art. And this has been really a wonder. I thank you so much, Larissa. This has been so interesting to find out. I would love to see his artwork too, if there's any chance somewhere along the line. Anyway, the poem is Liberation, begins with a quote by Carl Jung from the Red Book after Plate 119. You're no real pagan, but the kind of pagan who runs alongside our Christian religion. The jungle is endless lizard, emerald plates glitter into leaves, eyes. a tailiana tangles, a knight in blue-white robe scales, green scales, wielding a cutlass. Up the aquiline profile of cliff, he inches. Vines snap back on this homunculus, trapped in circularity, his questions unanswered by spirals. Hacked lizard limbs tumble over coral red roots. Nerves. The man cannot cleave himself free from this god coil, this snarled writ. Into the gold leaf background, an invisible icon throbs. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. This is amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you for your participation. Thank you, everyone who has read so far. Next up, we have Molly Peacock. Molly Peacock is the author of 7 volumes of poetry, most recently, The Analyst Poems, and a book about friendship and poetry called A Friend Sails In on a Poem. Molly, please.
Hello. It is amazing to be here and to hear all of the poets and memoirists speaking about Dean and his work. Thank you so much, Larissa. Thank you, Mark, as Dean's publisher. Dean and I met at the same time as I met Karen Neuberg in the late 1980s, I think 34 years ago. And Dean at the time was writing the poems that later became The Sentence That Ends with a Comma. And then he was a window dresser. He was working as a window dresser, and he did the windows. One of his clients was Zittimer Pharmacy, if those of you who know that drugstore on Madison Avenue. And Dean, after that class of the 92nd Street Y, became a private student of mine and then became a friend. We became good and gossipy friends and had a rich relationship over a long time. You know, as we all know, Dean was trained in the visual arts. And when we speak about the vision of a poet, I think it is largely the visual imagery in the poetry that we're talking about. And Dean's visual imagery was multi-layered and surprising. And I think in some ways it was his greatest strength, the genius that propelled his poems forward. I'm going to read the jacket comment that I read, that I wrote for the sentence that begins with a comma. Pardon me, the sentence that ends with a comma. It probably begins with one too. And then read a slightly more lighthearted poem from Dean called Taste, from Last Supper of the Senses. I also just want to make an aside and say that I appreciate so much Bonnie Walker's comments about Dean's memoir, and especially those compelling dolls that he made. We had many, many psychological conversations, and those dolls figured in our conversations and in a number of his poems, as well as in the memoir. So here's something that I wrote about him. Like dreams we wake from, with such strong emotions that our whole days are cast in the colors of their images, Dean Kostos's poems startle us with pictograms of vividly emotional late 20th century life. Lover of a linguistic curve, trained as a visual artist, Kostos takes us deep into his voluptuous sentences that are compelled to end with commas. Because he is so frank about his fears and so fearless about his imagery, the poet becomes a daring guide to a surreal world underpinned by the real pathos of love and mourning. So here's Taste, and has a wonderful epigraph by the 17th century mystic poet Thomas Traherne. And Traherne says, all tastes have hidden rooms within the tongue. And this is a little bit difficult to read because there's a lot of wordplay, and it begins with the day of the week, Sunday, and of course, and ice cream Sunday. Taste. It's Sunday, or is it Sunday? I'm always hungry for sweets, especially chocolate. Roan foal leaping into my mouth, just stopping there and saying that only Dean could I imagine as a poet equating a chocolate bar to a roan foal. Roan foal leaping into my mouth. Today I ask that colt for a ride to the creamy language of yesterday and find myself saddled on his back, past the steppes of Central Asia, arriving in Russia, time zone tomorrow. As the colt caracoles, then slows, I'm aware of taste draining from my palate. I bend down, look for it in the tongues of my shoes, not Rome or Rome, but Cordovan. No matter, any brown reminds me of chocolate. And the tingling loss on my wandering tongue. The road curves and tapers. Will it lead where gustation has flown? A pigeon, the color of Chekhov's hair, lands on a branch to sip dew. Have you seen my sense of taste? I ask. Have you plucked its ribbon for your nest? The bird whiffles into a cherry orchard. Maybe my sense is there. Clusters, voluptuous and crimson. Where else would taste vacation? I stump through the field of stumps, each one like Philomela's tongue, then hear that whiffle again. Which tree, which cluster? I listen to the lung, the language of my going, the voice of not knowing my path, and arrive at a Fabergé tree. Pressing on its trunk, I'm ushered through a trapdoor. No one's inside. Padding into room after upholstered room, I hear that sound, whiffle, in my head, until arriving at a chamber with a mahogany throne. No, not wood. Chocolate. I plunge into its cushion and from its armrest break off the carving of a pigeon that soars into my mouth.
Thank you so very much, Molly. That was wonderful. Next up, we have Todd Thilleman. Over the years, he has collaborated with artists and writers while publishing through Spurt and Derville, a press he continues to work at as manager editor. He is featured in the documentary Poetry New York. Todd, take it away.
I'm not sure Todd is here, Larissa. I actually texted him earlier. I think he might not be available. So
Okay.
maybe he'll show up a little bit later. We probably should move on to the next person.
All right, moving then right along. Next up, we have Thaddeus Rutkowski, who received a fiction writing fellowship from the New York Foundation for the Arts and teaches at Medgar Evers College. Thad, please take it away.
Yes, thanks. I hope you can hear me okay. I don't remember exactly where I met Dean. Oh, I wanted to say this is such a great gathering as a tribute to Dean, and I'm glad to be part of it. I think I met Dean at a reading, and shortly after that, we met for breakfast, and I don't know where, but it was near Union Square. And I remember going into Barnes and Noble with him on 17th Street, and I was interested in his work because he has a background in fine arts and visual art, and so do I. And not too many poets have that background. And anyway, after this meeting for breakfast, he said to me, anytime you want to have breakfast, just let me know. And I think we had a connection after that. And while I didn't see him regularly, we did some major things. We were on a panel at the AWP conference in New York in 2008. And I read for him at Cornelia. And the last time I saw him was with Larissa at the Mulberry Street Library, where they were both reading from their new books. And I know that we had a brief, but we had a good conversation at that reading in the library. I'm going to read my blurb for Broken Color, and you can see I picked out some of the visual art elements of the book, put them into this paragraph. In Broken Color, Dean Kostos takes his cue from the Impressionists, who placed colors onto canvas with discrete brushstrokes. The result is a poetic voice that brings memories and perceptions to the surface in statements rich with color and texture. Kostos uses his painterly sensibility to cover topics such as a difficult childhood, and he brings us along on his more recent travels to seek out influential works of art. He vividly describes American, European, and Japanese pieces and brings them to light as well as to life. We emerge more complete these journeys with him. And I picked this poem to read. It's called Litany for Yanis Ritsos. I don't know if this is in a book, and if anyone does know, please put it in the chat. I'm interested in ancient Greece and more modern Greece, and I was interested to learn more about this poet, Ritsos, who was he was part of the Greek resistance during World War II, I guess a leader of the Greek resistance. Litany for Yanis Ritsos, with poems scratched into wax paper and wires cut from telephone poles. With dust, miasmas exhaled from the ground. Fishermen's nets unraveled, mouthing a skein of cigarette smoke. You faced the Acropolis, bleeding a swastika, with the bite of dusty blood and the blue that veins blank papers, rust-reddened smoke. Compass needles pierced poles, with fish blood on nets unraveling. You traced the ground. You boiled soup from stones, plucked from ground, mouths mute as Philomelas, bleeding, with curfew streets unraveling, names singed on birth certificate papers, and war-charred Athens's flagless poles. You traced cursive smoke, with grapevines sprouting smoke, tongues of goats shriveled on the ground, and a forest filled with burnt cypress poles. You tore a page, poems bleeding onto invisible paper. You traced rage's unraveling, with sleeves of knitted script unraveling, fists grasping the syntax of smoke. After 22 Nobel refusals, papers drank ink from your pen on the grounds that you were a communist. Lies poured into blood, you traced the polarity of a civil war. With crutches carved from balsa poles, blind children wore bandages unraveling. When dictators' ropes choked blood from Eucharistic chalices, peasants swilled smoke. As a pen stabbed your brain to the ground, you traced blood-stained paper, a paper backdrop looped behind you, stretched between poles. Eyes winced at ground bones. The Aegean unraveled smoke, and you spat the salt of blood. Thank you, and thank you, Dean.
Thank you, Thad. Thank you so very much. We all know that Dean was the master of the ekphrasis, as we've heard ekphrastic poems today. I believe we have an image this time with Alice Rosenblit Lacey, a Pushcart-nominated poet who is a professor of English and creative writing for the City University of New York. John, can you allow Alice to share her screen? Oh, there we go. Good.
Well, thank you so
Alice,
much.
take it away.
Thank you so much, and Larissa, for organizing this, and everybody for your wonderful readings today. Before, Molly Peacock had said that Dean's visual imagery was multi-layered and surprising. And I thought that was a great intro to this poem by Dean from Rivering. It's called Introducing John L. Sullivan, a painting by George Bellows. What no one seems to notice is the way the tuxedoed announcer's jaw is a cup from which he pours confidence into himself. His grayed whiteness tapers into the sheen of his lapel as another man noses his face into his ear. This second man tilts his own thigh slightly with the lilting kick of a showgirl, as if in offering. What no one might want to notice is the referee's gesture, something like a sneeze, the last gasp of someone shot in the back, or the raised hand of a Helden tenor, shifting from recitative to aria. Even his mouth is open, not to speak, but to sing, in words whose every vowel is ah. What the referee, in the tentativeness of his gesture, pretends not to notice is the promoter, who looks as though his head could lift off from his shoulders like the lid from a teapot. A ceramic man, the fold in his suit, the collar and lapel are glazed onto him. The hat he's holding is an open mouth to swallow the song, if indeed it is a song, or only the yacht of the man beside him. What everyone must notice is the seated boxer, his swelling calves and sweating biceps, Mr. Sullivan sitting in the champ's corner of the ring. Tousled bangs shade deep-set eyes, or are they black and blue? He thanks a man bent in half like a maitre d', who's handing him something. The two hands merge in one continuous form, like a scroll of paper unrolling. What everyone might want to ignore is the bald man, Sullivan's trainer. His hand curves over the boxer's pale shoulder, his shaded face breathing words into Sullivan's ear. Does the trainer want to caress the boxer? Whatever he wants, he finds intimacy in being useful and accepts this role. What no one notices is the nothingness hung above the ring like an iron fist, the color of annealed metal cooling, now cold. This quadrant of darkness rises above the referee, above the promoter, above the trainer, even above Sullivan himself, casting a stain over the clutter of crowd below, over you and me, seated there in the second row. I just love how the end of that poem kind of includes us in it. And, you know, Dean was my poetry mentor and my friend and my colleague at York and LaGuardia colleges for many years. And, you know, this reading was a wonderful tribute to him, and just very glad to be a part of it and to see everybody here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Alice. So wonderful expresses. Adrian Kalfapoulou has authored 3 collections of poetry and 2 essay collections. On the Gaze, Dubai and its New Cosmopolitanisms is forthcoming in 2023. Adrienne?
Hi, thank you so much, Larissa and Mark, for doing this. I'm actually zooming in from Athens, Greece. So I feel like I'm somehow representing, channeling Dean's Greek side here. And I actually met Dean because I was adjuncting at NYU, and we found each other through our poetry, and you know, we were discussing kind of our backgrounds. And as Patricia said, he was very close to his grandmother and talked a lot about his grandmother. And we shared that a lot, talking about sort of our ancestral backgrounds in Greece. And one of the things I really remember about Dean, beyond his amazing generosity and just always making time for people. And we didn't really know each other, and he wanted to introduce me to New York. I was new to New York, and he said, "Oh, I'm going to show you something." And he showed me, he took me to the statue of Gandhi, and he was talking about Gandhi and how much both the statue and the story of Gandhi meant to him. And that was like that memory really is very vivid still in my you know, in my imagination and in my heart too. So I'm going to read a poem, The Tender, which I really love also because, as everybody has been discussing, Dean had just such a genius for wedding the surreal with something also rather playful. I mean, for all the darkness sometimes that was in the poem, there was also a playfulness that was so sort of intricate. And I think that's also another part of his humanity, you know, this way the empathy and the playfulness would peek through and come through in his surrealism as well. So The Tender, there's a small epigram, a small boat that ferries people in a port. A bed sails down a river, a name carved into its headboard. Floating from Amherst, Emily Dickinson unlaces her coutil corset with a quill, scrawls, "A bed is not a boat, twinned in water's reflection, but a vessel into mind." When hallelujahs echo from distant hymnals, she recalls mulberries in May, fingers blued. Today, she tastes the burn of absence, metallic on her tongue. Dust darkens beveled windows, ghosting panes, each one a quatrain onto paradise. Squinting through history's glass, future, past, she knows the bed will arrive. Sheets embroidered with eglantine unbraiding her hair, she'll dip its strands to inscribe stanzas in water, words that will unwrite themselves. And I hope Dean is there in that paradise, squinting through history's glass. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Adrienne. F.J. Bergman is up next, who fantasizes in Wisconsin about tragedies on exoplanets. F.J., please fantasize with us.
Is F.J. here? I saw her earlier.
I regret that I never. Am I here? Am I live?
You are. You are.
Oh, we can hear you.
All right. I regret that I never met Dean Kostos in person. And from what I've heard today, I am immensely the poorer for it. I too became a poet because I was a failed visual artist. So we have that in common. I published a number of Dean's poems in the journal Starline, the journal of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Poetry Association. And I'd like to read a couple of his wonderful science fiction poems. This one has an epigraph. Hindu legend maintains that ancient sages, rishis, came from a destroyed world, providing the foundation of Earth's knowledge. The first rishis. Reliquaries hoarded Vedic writ, obelisks from stone temples, sandalwood paste, and gold discs. Arriving at the claimed planet, sages climbed from chariots, pockets encased gold discs. Rishis spoke pulverized stars. Lunar powders traced the sun's gold disk, swimming into the world's bloodstream. Lost knowledge flickered, chased as gold discs. Skulls turned into ashrams with russet murals. Gurus' heads graced gold discs. Wisdom petrified into stone lions, limbs into trees, fruit glazed like gold discs. Millennia passed, scribes ground history into ink, Shiva embraced by a gold disc. A lineage of yogis spirals from Himalayas, brushes paint what can't be traced, gold discs. And this very short little poem on the nature of reality, on the reality of nature. A dead star shrieked, scudded down light year tracks, showered sparks, arriving at human sight, vanished. Thank you.
Thank you very much, FJ. I'm going to take a turn now. How I met Dean is I read his books first. I read This Is Not a Skyscraper, and I said, this man is going to be my teacher. I'm going to, and I invited him to join a panel at AWP. And we first met at the Imagine altar that in Strawberry Fields, the stone altar imagined to John Lennon. We met there and we spoke, and he did become my mentor. We exchanged, I had the privilege of exchanging poetry with him, and we gave feedback to one another on our work, and his was always very spare but perfect. The exact juste, mot juste, always there. And I still think of him as my teacher when I hear his poetry, and I'm going to read one of my favorites from Pierced by Night-Colored Threads, Neruda's Tears. You have vines and stars in your hair, Pablo Neruda. The exiled poet, ambassador of questions without answers, found residence in language. His green ink scrawled into leaves. His vines forged a frigate, Chilean sea to America, pilgrimage to visit the pages of Whitman. That scribe of the battlefield hoarded days in jars. At the Library of Congress, crossed out sheaves surrounded Neruda. Imprinted word and wordlessness. Below the seraphic dome, below mournful mothering arches, the Chilean poet read manuscript pages, inhaled sweat, sun, gunpowder. Scarred by self-censorship, the long lines released spirits of lilacs and starving soldiers. Neruda turned folios and wept, each tear splattering script, each tear mingling with ink, until green shoots grew, dislodging brittle bones. Their specters rose up and whittled sirens to keen across the sea. And we keen a little today at the loss of our friend. And I want to thank all of you for your beautiful participation and for the beautiful readings. And Mark, would you read us a poem to take us out?
I will. And once again, thank you all for this wonderful tribute to Dean. Like I've said, I think he deserves to be known more than he was. He felt that way as well, but of course we all do. But he deserves a wider audience. So let's get the word out. As I said in the chat, anyone who wishes to have a copy of his last book for free, just email madhadarts, one word, @gmail.com. It's in the chat. And I'll send you a copy of Dean's book. And if you fancy writing a review or something, or an essay about it, or riffing off it, or whatever, that would be great. Let's get Dean out there as much as we can. And thank you all for this wonderful tribute to Dean. Let me read, actually, the title poem of his last book, Broken Color, which was after a photograph by him, and it was manipulated. And it's like this. 1. Impressionists stabbed paint in short strokes, refracted violent luminosity to spill over forms, figures, flesh. 2. Rising from the bank of a creek, a tree's roots resembled Chinese characters. Ryozymes tangled below a body of water, bark like elephant hide, ripples, puckered skin. 3. In this landscape that doesn't exist, leaves explode. Shrapnel, white, gray, indigo, a tree trunk slants across the scene, across time's border. Ashen colors evoke the firebombing of Dresden. 4. Branches anoint a thicket of shattered wings. Wind and blast of sun, ferocious light, sear an imprint. Face on the shroud of Turin. And that was Dean's poem, Broken Color, from the collection. So I think definitely Dean was in his latter years moving more toward the mystic, which in my opinion was a good thing. Hopefully we will remember him for many, many years to come. We will read his work. And either way, we were all so happy to have you as our friend. Thank you, everybody, for a wonderful night. Wishing you a wonderful rest of your weekend.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you a millionfold. Thank you. I'm glad that this has been recorded, and it will be.
Thank you.
And it will be archived on YouTube for anybody who missed it, who would like to listen to it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Larissa. Wonderful event.
Beautiful show.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Blessing.
Well.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Larissa, thank you.
everyone.
Thank you, Larissa. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dean.
Yeah, thank you, Dean.
Thank you.
Oh, God.